Summer is supposed to be an opportunity to slow down, but when you look at your kids, you can't help but notice that your kids are growing up fast. Help them build independence as they grow with Greenlight. Greenlight is a debit card and money app for families, where parents can keep an eye on kids' money habits while kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely. It's the easy, convenient way to raise financially smart kids. Get your first month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/Spotify.
Today on CityCast Houston, back to school kicks off next week for thousands of students in the Houston Independent School District. It will be the second year under state-appointed Superintendent Mike Miles, and we wanted to ask him your questions and concerns about the new year and the sweeping changes he's made. From major staff turnover to his new education system, or NES curriculum, to when the takeover could end. Superintendent Miles joins me to answer your questions. It's Monday, August 5th. I'm Raheel Ramzanali, and here's what Houston is talking about. Superintendent Miles, welcome back into CityCast Houston. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
So let's talk about back to school. And before we jump into everything HISD, I'm curious, who was your favorite teacher growing up? And what was that teacher's teaching style that you loved so much about that teacher?
The teacher that I think that comes to mind first is a lady named Mary Lou Shern. And she was my 9th and 10th grade and 11th grade language arts teacher at Fountain Fort Carson High School. I enjoyed being in her class because she always challenged me. She gave me extra work, graded my papers a little harder. She knew that I wanted to go to West Point, and she just really helped.
We love hearing stories about teachers. And, some students feel that their best teachers are leaving HISD. One was an AP World History teacher, Mr. Dunn, at an A-rated school. He spoke at one of the May board meetings as well. Why do you think experienced teachers are leaving?
I think we only have about 40 teacher vacancies at this point. We're going to start the year off with 0 vacancies, pretty sure. When you think about it, out of almost 11,000 teachers, I think the real number is 10,770. But out of the almost 11,000 teachers, we only have 40 spaces left. So I focus on the fact that we are drawing a whole bunch of teachers to HISD. Last Saturday, over 800 teachers appeared for a job fair. And at that point, we only had about 120 vacancies. And all summer long, we've been turning away teachers, lots of them, because they're not ready to enter HISD at this time. So that's what I focus on. And I think, everybody gets used to the teacher that they have. And so it's understandable. But we're attracting really high quality teachers. We obviously did last year as well because we got the outcomes. And I think we're going to get just as good at outcomes this year.
So those are vacancies, but I'm talking about turnover. Turnover has been a big topic of conversation with HISD, with over 7,000 teachers, principals, and other school staff who have either been removed or left by choice.
You said 7,000?
Yeah, across all staff, teachers, principals.
That's
according to public records.
I haven't even added that number. That's not accurate. But anyway, your point is...
That number that we got was from public records, so I just wanted to clarify that. Do you have a different number?
I mean, it always depends on what you're counting. I said publicly, we eliminated, I think, 1,400 positions just in central office staff. So if you're counting numbers like that from the beginning of the year or middle of the year, first semester, we eliminated 2,000 positions. Most were vacancies. So it really depends on what you're counting. And so people need to be careful about what numbers you're talking about and how you're counting them.
And so the Houston Chronicle also found that a record number of principals left, 76 or a quarter of all schools. How concerning is that? Because there is research that shows that turnover is really expensive, and it can also bring down student achievement, which is such a high priority for you.
The real question is, do you have the staff you need to get the outcomes you need for kids? Not just achievement outcomes, but preparation for a different world and workplace, taking care of their social and emotional needs. Do you have that kind of staff? It's not so much the retention that matters, it's the recruitment that matters. And if we're able to get all of our positions filled so that we don't have, like it was the year before I got here, 644 vacancies at the start of the school year. That's the year before I got here. Uh, Tell me how that hurts kids and their ability to achieve and their ability to connect and build relationships. That can't be good for any district. So having qualified teachers at the beginning of the year, that's the most important number. Then let's look at the outcomes at the end of the year. We were able to get the highest growth increase in achievement in the NES reading overall and NES math overall than the district has ever seen. And you're going to see, I'll give you a teaser, our accountability ratings. We had 121 DNF schools last year, and that is going to drop significantly, probably about 2/3. I can't give you the exact number yet because right in the middle of counting all that and getting the data set, but it's going to be a significant drop in DNF schools, which is our charge. I've been in over 120 schools. I've listened to the kids. I've seen them. I've heard them firsthand, not secondhand, not one or two kids. I'm talking about a whole bunch of kids. I've talked to a whole bunch of principals. And in those schools, there's a vibrancy. Kids are thriving. I think that's the information I use to determine whether or not we're getting the right teachers or not.
So when school starts in 1 week, your administration has predicted that enrollment will drop another 2.2%, roughly about 4,000 students, right? On top of the previous declines that HISD has already faced. Is that what you're still expecting right now?
We're going to wait and see. We had to put what we think is a reasonable assumption in order to budget well, right? You have to determine what your enrollment is going to be, so you have an idea of what your revenue is going to be coming in. So in order to do a budget, you have to make some assumptions. Given that the district year after year over the last 6 years has declined in enrollment, we thought it was prudent budget-wise to put a decline in enrollment. But let's wait and see so we don't have to speculate. But it's prudent to think that you might have a lower enrollment.
How much do you think that's going to impact the budget?
Again, because we budgeted for a decrease in enrollment, if we have fewer than 4,000 kids not return and enrollment of 4,000 or fewer kids that don't show up, then the budget will be fine.
For the parents that are considering leaving HISD and sending their kids to charter schools, what would you like to say to them?
I'd like to focus on the parents who are considering, coming back to the district. Because I think that's probably the narrative that's out there more. When you see the STAR scores in many of the schools that were struggling go up, like they did more than any other time, I think the real question is, how many parents see those STAR scores and say, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't have gone to KIPP or Yes Prep. No offense to those schools; those are good networks too. But we want to get to a point where we're competing. And when you see DNF campuses going to B rated or A rating, I think you got to think twice about whether or not you should be coming back to HISD. The truth is, the part of the enrollment over the last 6 years has obviously nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with, well, not everything, but partly to do with low achievement. And so getting the achievement back up, I think the real question is, maybe the parents will be coming back. And I say to those parents, hey, we're going to continue to grow. Our kids had a good year. We have 130 NES schools, and our other non-NES schools did well too. The entire district did well, better than any other district by far. Come to HISD.
I want to talk about the budget because the Board of Managers passed a budget that cut about $500 million, and your team has said that they will mainly come from the central office and you will try to minimize the impact on students in the classroom. But families are already seeing cuts in things like college counselors, libraries, and now buses as well. Why didn't the district tell families sooner that transportation routes were changing?
I've had an efficiency report since February that says that we were going to make changes to be more efficient. The district spends $56 million to transport fewer than 9,000 students. So that has always been on the table. And I think the overwhelming majority of the responses I've heard about the transportation is that, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense that we stop having buses transport 2 or 3 kids on a 70-passenger bus. We got to stop doing. Now, we're still doing some of that just because we can't just go cold turkey, but we're drastically cutting that time down, and we're cutting time on buses down. I think it's not a good thing to have a kid on a bus more than an hour. And our average times for some of the kids who do choice is an hour and 15 minutes, down from an hour and 30 minutes. So actually, it's a little bit closer to an hour, but an hour is too long. Down the road, there'll be more changes in transportation as we become more and more efficient as a district. We added satellite bus barns so that the drive time for our bus drivers will be lower and the routes will be shorter.
So you had the efficiency report in February, but families didn't find out until July. That seems like a really good example of the frustration that a lot of people in the community have told us about communication. Could that have been better, right? The communication between the district and families.
We can always do better on communications, and no question about that. With regard to the buses, we told them well in advance of the time where they're actually going to get the routes that there'll be some changes. We don't publish the routes until about a week before school starts. And you probably know every year for about 3 weeks, there's a lot of changes because while we have the list of kids who wanted transportation, that list changes every day as people enroll. And then some people say they want transportation and then they won't show up because they've found alternate routes or they've moved or things like that. So there's going to be lots of fluidity. And then we'll handle anything that is a real hardship for folks.
Last time you were on with us, we talked about communication, and that was one thing that people were frustrated back then. Do you think, looking back, you've done a good job of communicating the changes that you've wanted implemented or major changes that have been made with the community, with parents, with students?
I think a district this size, communication is always a struggle. And yes, we can do better. And we'll do better. It's also a different media age. Information is spread by social media, and there's nothing any district can do to beat the people on social media. And so trying to clarify things that's misinformation is hard. Having said all that, I think we put in place a better communications plan for both internal and external audiences. And so we're feeling like it's already starting to have an impact. We've gotten some feedback to that effect. So we'll continue to improve communications throughout the year.
We've gotten a lot of questions from families and community members about reading in libraries. And one issue is just access to books. How do you explain the removal of libraries, particularly in low-performing schools when reading scores are so low? Because we've seen research that shows reading improves when children read high-interest books of their own choosing.
Yeah, so our reading scores went up tremendously this year, even though the NES schools didn't have libraries. Now, they didn't have librarians, they had libraries. So the books are still there. The books can still be accessed. We have a text-rich environment in all of our schools, but especially the NES schools. At some point, you have to start asking, why did you get the reading scores when you didn't have any librarians? Not, the fact that, why are the librarians gone? Our reading scores overall in the NES orbit increased. We're still behind on proficiency. We're catching up, but in the increase has been better than ever. So I hope you start turning to that and saying, okay, why is that? Why did the reading scores go up without librarians? How's that possible?
Why is that? Tell me.
Because we focus on the science of reading. We focus on high quality reading teachers, high quality instructional materials, and high quality teachers. So when you train your teachers to have high quality instruction, when you use high quality instructional materials, when you have people trained in the science of reading, that's what makes the difference. So if we could have librarians in every school, that would be great. But, we had to cut, as you said earlier in the program, a lot of money out of the budget. That was a trade-off that I was willing to make because we knew what really matters when it comes to raising reading achievement and reading proficiency.
Gotcha. Later this week, the Board of Managers will decide if they put the largest school bond in HISD's history on the ballot in November, which is $4.4 billion. Now, if voters reject the bond, do you believe that's a reflection on your leadership?
Look, we are a team of 10, and yes, I think the leadership is always accountable or at least responsible in some ways for anything that major that happens or fails to happen in a district. At the same time, I'm confident that the community is looking at this, not looking at me or the board so much, but looking at what the kids need. I think in the long term, people understand that's the bottom line. What do our kids need with facilities? It's an investment over the next 30 years, a bond is, right? I'll be long gone. The board will be long gone. And this investment will still continue. So the community, I trust that they're gonna support the bond because they know what kids need. They know our kids can't wait. And they know it's an investment in the city and the kids of the city. Not a reflection of the policies.
Can you tell me about the co-location proposal in the bond? There's 15 schools that would be merged, right? Basically, they would share one building. The principals and programs would remain same for each school, but they're, again, sharing one building. Some community leaders have told us that they fear this is a way of closing those schools. Is that something you're willing to take off?
So it's always difficult. And I've said, and we want to make sure that we try to have community schools. When I first got here, people said, well, you're just going to close schools and that's your mandate. And the last board, the board before this board of manager, the elected board, and boards before that elected board has entertained closing schools. They have a list, and it's understandable that there'd be some discussion. There are some people who want us to close schools because they think that's the most fiscally prudent. And there's a certain amount of sense in that. At the same time, I've said, and I continue to argue, that we need to keep our community schools. It's especially in the underserved areas. People rely on the community schools for a whole bunch of things, not just the education of the kids, but that's obviously the main thing. And the other thing is this: when there are enough kids in the area and a school has declining enrollment, what does that tell you? It tells me that we, the education system, the leaders of the district, have not done a good enough job of building that school up academically, programmatically, culturally, social and emotionally. We haven't done that. And so we lose kids to other charter schools or to other places in the district. And so how about we build that school up academically, programmatically, before we think about closing it? Obviously, if there's a place in the district where demographically the kids are gone and you start losing enrollment, you're down there around 200 or 180, then that's not a viable option. But we're not there yet. We do have some small schools. We can't afford to build all those schools, 15 new schools. We can't afford to do that. But we can afford to co-locate, keep the community schools alive, and really improve both their facilities, but also their academics. And that's what a co-location means.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you about special education. I know you have to get going, but this is something that we've talked about before. So let's talk about special education. And your administration has made a lot of progress this year. Last year was the single biggest increase in students receiving services in 7 years. And also, HISD is holding more meetings with families as they're required by law. This is all according to the Houston Landing. At the same time, though, 4 out of 10 students with disabilities aren't making any progress towards their goals. Why do you think that is?
I don't know if that statistic is accurate, but let me just address what I think is accurate. And that is we continue to improve the IEP, individual education plans, the ones required by law, the ones that special needs students have. And we started this year, the first time ever, of reviewing IEPs and how well they're written and how well they serve kids. Stacy Vincent, our deputy chief of special education, did a great job, she and her team, of starting that process so that we, for the first time, know very clearly what percentage of our IEPs are done well and which ones are not. And because we're looking more closely, we identify even more some of the challenges with providing the services, some of it brought on by poorly written IEPs. And so this year, I think we did a great job, as you pointed out, on many of the compliance things that are required. But we have to do a better job with following through on IEPs, making sure they're tight. And that means improving the services for kids. And then the third thing, and this is related to the second, is the quality of instruction. We have to provide special needs students with higher quality instruction. That's a problem in the profession. It's a problem here, and we're going to do a lot better job this year on that.
Gotcha. One final question before we let you go. How many more years of student improvement do you need to say, my job here is done and it's time to hand control back to an elected school board?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The answer to that question needs to be answered by the Commissioner of Education. I can just give you what I think. I think if we do a couple more years, this year and one more year of good, solid growth, it doesn't have to be as great as it was this year. This year's, incredible improvement. Remember, the exit criteria says 0 schools with multiple years of D or F status. And we're going to knock that 121 down by 2/3 or so. Again, I'll give you the exact number next week. But if we can have 2 more years of good, solid growth and removal of D and F campuses and helping them get to A, B, or C status in the next 2 years, I think sometime in the third year, so in the third year of this transformation, I think the commissioner might decide, hey, we can start to transition to an elected board and ensure that in the fourth year, some elected board members are placed on the board of managers. So again, I'll say again, that's up to the commissioner. That's not my decision. That's just my thinking.
What happens if it's just flat? The growth isn't there. And then does this turn into a 4 or 5 year, takeover, or are you then let go?
Yeah. That's correct. If the commissioner doesn't feel like we're on the right track or, to make progress, let's say we stall out and it's flat for the next 2 years, I think he's going to keep it going. But, again, that's up to him. He's got to see that we're going to be meeting the exit criteria. And as long as we're making progress towards it, it doesn't have to be as good as this year. This is an incredible year. But I'm optimistic that we're going to have as strong a year this coming year as we had this last year.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Miles.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the time. Bye.
That was state-appointed Superintendent Mike Miles with questions from Nicklin Rios, Heather Sussman-Golden, Brooke Baston-Longoria, Amanda Parrish, Susan LaForette, Esther Uribe, Amy Duthit-Maddox, Savant Moore, and Sarah Spear-Selber. Do me a favor, please share this episode with an HISD parent or teacher you know, and also leave us a review wherever you listen. I've also linked our daily newsletter, Hey Houston, in our show notes if you haven't subscribed yet. That will do it for today. I'm Raheel Ramzanali. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new. Can I ask you, before we let you go, I just, for these...
My assistants are saying we're like 10 minutes over, but go ahead. Last question.